Hey. So let's not beat around the bush. Why do you not want to ban assault weapons? And be honest. No, that's only fair. The reason why I don't feel that the Second Amendment should be altered, specifically as it relates to an assault weapons ban, is because it's prohibited by the Second Amendment. The Bill of Rights clearly states in the Second Amendment that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I think a blanket ban of assault weapons is unconstitutional and unnecessary.
The United States Constitution, specifically the Bill of Rights, was ratified in 1788 by the Second Continental Congress. The context which is necessary to understand this point is that the American government had just finished their own revolution, fighting the greatest empire and military that had ever seen the face of this earth. They were able to do this through insurgent warfare. Although they did not win many conventional battles on their own without the aid of other major powers like France, they were able to deter British forces and prolong the war to the point where they didn't have to win, but they only had to not lose. Because they attributed much of their success to this, they thought it necessary to equip their populace with a readily available supply of firearms in order to allow them to overthrow the British government should they ever cede control again on the American continent, or to overthrow the current government should it ever fall into the wrong hands. And as such, it was written like this: a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Okay, so you don't think that we should do anything to these headlines that we see? Children, families, loved ones, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, brothers, they're getting massacred in our streets. I see it every day, or not every day, every week, but it feels like it's happening all the time. Also, I don't think that's what the Second Amendment is for. I think the Second Amendment guarantees you a right to defend yourself with a gun, a right to hunt with a gun, but I don't think those things require assault weapons. I don't think something like an AR-15 is necessary to kill deer or to defend yourself with. I think you can do that just fine with a handgun. Now that, my friend, is a common misconception. The Second Amendment wasn't designed only for people to defend themselves from a random assailants and for hunting. Although it could be used for that. I grant you that. And a lot of people do find use of the Second Amendment through those means. But the truth of the matter is that the founders were just finished fighting the greatest empire on earth. A tyranny that was being imposed on them for 2 centuries, ever since they really were designated a colony by the British Empire. They attributed a lot of their success to the fact that the people were in large part armed and able to rise up as insurgents against their British overlords. And with this in mind, they drafted the Bill of Rights, the right to speech, assembly, religion, press, and then following that, the Second Amendment. They're all designed to prevent tyranny. The Second Amendment was designed specifically to overthrow the American government should it ever fall into the wrong hands, should it ever steer to the direction of a fascist Germany or a Soviet American state. Obviously, there is some subtext to the way our laws are written. And because of that, there was a lot of dispute for a very long time over what the purpose of the Second Amendment was. until DC versus Heller, which ruled exactly that. Well, let me give you some context. At first, the distinction was made between a militia, which was defined for a very long time as the citizenry that would rise up and overthrow the government, not the people. They separated the two. They said that the militia's right to arms was unalienable, but the people's right wasn't, until the landmark court case DC versus Heller, which litigated that section of the Bill of Rights was referring specifically to the people, not the militia, and that they're interchangeable almost. So that is why I believe that.
I already covered most of my point here, but I'll hit all the key points in context that you didn't get previously. In the 1970s, the District of Columbia passed a local ordinance banning the private ownership of firearms outside of use for police officers and security guards. A special police officer who wanted to own and take his firearm after hours was denied access to his firearm and subsequently sued the city. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, where they ruled that he had the right to keep and bear arms, separate from the well-regulated militia portion of the Second Amendment. This is important, as oftentimes people make the argument that the well-regulated militia portion of the Second Amendment is what actually guarantees our right to a firearm, not the right of the individual. They often cite that we have the National Guard, therefore there is no need for the Second Amendment. Well, this case completely invalidates that argument.
Not only this Supreme Court case, but the founding fathers at the time endorsed the broad scope of weaponry at the time. James Madison wrote a letter to a ship captain who had requested the use of cannons, and he granted it to him under the Second Amendment. Not to mention that these men were not idiots. Not only were they not idiots, they had access to firearms at the time that took longer than a minute to reload, like the Belton flintlock, which was invented decades before. So to say that these men had no concept that weapons were going to evolve or that they could fire as many rounds as they do today is just simply false.
Here we have the James Madison letter. It reads as follows. Mounting 6 carriage guns and navigated by 40 men, hereby authorizing James M. Mortimer, Captain, and William Ross, Lieutenant, of the said schooner Patapsco, what a name, and the officers and crew thereof, to subdue, seize, and take any armed or unarmed British vessel, public or private, which shall be found within the jurisdictional limits of the United States or elsewhere on the high seas. And here we have the Belton flintlock, a rifle at the time capable of producing semi-automatic fire, a revolutionary item at the time, but greatly expensive, as Ben Franklin, who commissioned the use and production of 100 Belton flintlocks to his personal friend, the inventor, Mr. Belton. After they were tested and the price given, the U.S. government decided not to use them because of how expensive they were. Clearly, the government knew. And clearly, if they wanted to regulate it, they had every opportunity to do so, but didn't.
That's all well and good. But the fact of the matter stands is that the weapons that exist today are highly effective at what they were made to do. And I see them left and right. I do think that these weapons are the primary choice of these killers. And if we take them away from them, then maybe we can stop some of this violence. Yet another misconception, my friend. The majority of all gun deaths in the United States are committed by handguns, including mass shootings. This is not even to mention the fact that most deaths by a handgun, let alone all guns in the United States, are by suicide, not homicide, not accidental death, not involuntary manslaughter, but suicide. And to say that you're going to prevent those deaths by banning weapons is simply not true.
As previously stated, a Sage Studies publication showed that handguns were more likely to be used in a mass shooting scenario than a rifle, thus discrediting the notion that in order to stop mass shootings, we need to ban rifles. Similarly, the FBI crime statistics show that handguns are used twice as much in any shooting across America, including gang and drug offenses. In the article titled Gun Deaths and Gun Control Debate in the United States by The Lancet, found that nearly 2/3 of all gun deaths in the United States were attributable to suicide, discrediting the notion that there is a broad epidemic of gun homicide.
And another thing, too, even though it's unnecessary for the reasons I just told you, machine guns, meaning automatic weapons, one trigger pull, multiple rounds leave the chamber, are already heavily regulated in the United States through the National Firearms Act. They're trackable through the $200 tax that you have to pay upon every purchase of that firearm.
In the United States, automatic weapons, defined as firearms that can fire more than one round or more than two rounds after one trigger pull, are already regulated heavily by the federal government via the National Firearms Act, which requires a $200 tax with the purchase of an automatic weapon. Using this, you can track proof of sale and ownership, thereby making it more heavily regulated than pistols or regular rifles.
And one final thing before I go. Recently, we've seen a massive uptick in gun ownership and gun sales specifically in the United States. Why haven't we seen an uptick in mass shootings?
According to a publication, gun sales in places like Colorado have seen an almost 1,000% increase in legal gun sales. Now, if the narrative were true that we need to ban legally owned firearms in the United States in order to prevent mass shootings, then shouldn't this ratio in Colorado of mass shootings to gun ownership be 1-to-1? I ask to you, the viewer, why is this not the case?
An interesting thought, but for another time. Thanks for having me.